you're starting for England next week. You work a lot harder, there's more risk of injury, you play a lot more games, it's a lot more physical. Pretty quickly realising it's not all it's dressed up to be at times. You've seen mates retire early through an injury, and you know you're that one injury away from it potentially ending. If you're doing that for 12 or 15 years, your body will give up.
Why isn't rugby more popular in England?
There's obviously a load of issues around the game with the risks and the dangers, the CTE side of stuff. People talk about rugby being elitist, it's a private school game. I think we need to celebrate rugby for what it is. It's a great game, it's a physical game. Celebrate the brutality of it.
Is Dupont the greatest player ever?
No.
Who would be your greatest player ever then?
Jonah Lomu. Respectfully, when he played, he looked like a freak on the rugby field.
Yeah.
An absolute phenomenon. Fast forwarded the game into professionalism because of his superstardom.
Okay, so how old were you when you knew you were going to be a professional rugby player?
Great question to start. Reality, the game turned professional in '95, and I was a 15-year-old kid at school, and my mum was a maths teacher who always kind of pushed into me that education's the most important thing, obviously, with her background, and it was. So growing up, it wasn't ever an
think
option.
about it?
No, it wasn't an option until I turned 16, really. And I got offered a very small contract by Coventry Rugby Club to be part of their sort of young first team squad. As a 16-year-old, I knew I was never going to play for the first team, but it was that first step. And so realistically, I mean, I went to school obviously till I was 18, did my A-levels and all that, and then got offered a contract by Leicester. So it wasn't really an opportunity growing up as a kid thinking, I want to be a professional rugby player.
Yeah.
The big thing was, I want to be as good as I can be at rugby and push myself as far. I'd love to play for England and a club and all that stuff, but it wasn't ever a career choice until very much later in my education at 18, 17, when the game was turning fully professional and you could make a career out of it. So it was, my love for rugby was just born out of doing it every day as much as I could because I love the game, and not, I want to make a career out of this because that opportunity just wasn't there growing up.
So when you're 13, 14, you're thinking, I want to grow up and play for England, but that's, you're thinking you're going to have a job and that's going to be a massive passion, but not necessarily what you do as a career.
Yeah, 100%. And I thought I was going to be an accountant or something like that. Mum's a maths teacher and I love numbers and everything that goes with that. And it was more education, university, and then, find a career was the plan. And I love spreadsheets and numbers and all that, but which sounds really boring. It is, and I use it now in my job in the city as well. But becoming a professional rugby player wasn't a plan until the game turned professional in sort of 95, 96, and then it's an opportunity. But it was in its embryonic stage, so it wasn't something that you could really plan for and map out as kids can do now at 12, 13 years of age, if they are in that sort of sphere of it being a possibility, I suppose.
So imagine at the time when it first goes pro, there'd be people thinking, this might not work, we might have to revert back to an amateur game. I can't imagine the salaries were very good at all at the beginning. So that must have been quite... So did you go to university anyway?
Yeah, I went to Loughborough, and I took leave of absence after a year.
Right, okay.
So I did a first year at Loughborough Uni, took leave of absence because professional rugby was so new. Yeah. No one really knew what was going to happen. And I went with all the best intentions of doing a 3-year degree, hopefully coming out the other end of it. I've got an elder brother who was straight A's at A-level, so it was kind of, the pathway was he's the kind of clever one and he's gone to uni and all that stuff, and I was more of the sporty kid that was okay at school in terms of achievements, but not sort of top of the range. So it was go to university, and then we got to the end of our kind of first year, and as professionalism was kicking in, and I was at Leicester, Dean Richards sort of said to me, he said, look, you either need to, there's an opportunity for you to become a full-time professional here, or do it part-time with education, and kind of, he didn't put the pressure on me, but it was like, you need to make a decision, because I'd be missing lectures to go to training, and then missing training to go to lectures, to try and appease both sides of it, because there wasn't ever something where it could work side by side. We used to be at training from 8 till 5, So you couldn't be at lectures or at training.
They wouldn't train that long now.
No.
Yeah.
Well, some days they do,
Right.
but it's way more scientific and it's it's more planned out. We'd be on training pitch for 3 hours.
Yeah.
And you're like, it was great because you're getting paid to do what you love.
Yeah.
But the science of professionalism and rugby and how you manage your body throughout the week to get to a game at the weekend has changed hugely over the last 20 odd years. And you're not on the training field now for 3 hours. We were smashing each other at Leicester because it was we didn't know any differently. And it worked at the time, but with time and knowledge and education of sports science and everything, things have changed. And ultimately, it had to be a decision back then for me to do one or the other. And I always promised, I'll never forget, I always promised my parents and my grandparents, who were massive influences on me, that I'd go back and finish my degree, which I've never managed to.
They're still waiting for you. Yeah. There's a place open for you at Loughborough if you want to.
Well, I don't know now. I'm a bit old for that.
I did the same. I dropped out of university. Obviously not to pursue anything sporting, but to have my own business. And I started out with just taking a year's break and I'll go back. And that was a long time ago now. So, and it will not be happening. That's for sure.
No.
Okay, how many clubs do you play for? Because you played for a lot of clubs.
Oh, great question. So I started at Leicester, and then I went to Saracens. Then I came back to Leicester. Then I went to Brive in France. Then to play for the Sharks in South Africa. Back to Worcester. Then to Wasps. Then I signed for London Irish, but didn't quite pull on the jersey. So retired, came out of retirement and went to Newcastle. So 2 stints at Leicester, eight different clubs. Yeah.
Why so many?
That's a good question, really. And I look back on it now, and I look back at all my different experiences at different clubs and reasons for going to different clubs now. And I go back to my first 4 years at Leicester were, amazing. Being an 18-year-old kid, having watched sort of Living with the Lions in '97 and seeing Jono and Backy and, Roundtree and these guys that were household names, and then walking into the changing room and trying to earn their respect and playing with them. And we had huge success, and I was very lucky and privileged to be in that environment for 4 years. And then things changed a little. One of the coaches changed, who I judge people on how they treat you and honesty. And there was a few things with one of the coaches where I just didn't feel he was being honest with me. So Saracens came in and were interested in signing me. And your life as a professional sportsman is based on your talent, your effort, what you put into it, a little bit of luck as well, and other people's opinions of you. So if you've got a coach that doesn't see you as a first choice player or isn't perhaps being as honest with you as you think he can be, and your trust has gone with them, and another opportunity comes at another club, then you have to look at those other opportunities, because you've got professional rugby is a team sport, but also you're an individual in that team of your own career. And so I looked at moving to Saracens because I didn't feel that I was getting the honesty from this one coach. Ironically, that one coach then comes to Saracens a year later.
Great.
And I left on really good terms with Dean Richards, John Wells, the board, and I said, look, I'm leaving because of this reason. And they were like, that will change, without sort of preempting what was going to happen. But they left the door open for me to come back, and a year later I came back, and ultimately then I spent a 10-year stint at Leicester over 2 spells, 4 and 6 years, and eventually other opportunities came for me. I think people look at my career and go, well, you had 8 different clubs, that's loads of clubs. But I did a 10-year stint at Leicester over 2 spells, and I love the club and everything that we achieved there and everything it taught me. And I took that to different environments, and ultimately, the older you get, and I suppose the main reason initially for leaving Leicester was a trust thing with one coach, but I pretty quickly got back to Leicester. It was where my heart was. But then after the 10-year stint leaving Leicester was more so, I got to 28 years of age, and it was more a selfish decision of what was best for me in my career at the time, in terms of earning money, being really frank, the opportunities that were there, and sometimes, I left Leicester to go to Brive. Now, we were in the final at Leicester, the Premiership final, pretty regularly, or at the top echelons of the game. And, I went to a club in France, in Brive, and I loved my time there, but it was very different. They were near the bottom of the league, and they were trying to build something, and it was a different challenge. And, it's a fairly vulgar thing to say, but I was earning 3 times as much money. So
is that much? There was that big a difference.
There was, yeah. And at certain times,
short career, you got to earn.
You have to look at that.
Yeah.
And fans and people look at sport as a passion, and as I do. But when you're living in it in the heart of your career, and you've seen mates retire early through an injury, and you're that one injury away from it potentially ending. The older you get, your priorities change a little bit, I think. And though you have to sum up every opportunity that's in front of you and have good people around you. I had an amazing agent in Duncan Sandland who I trusted with my life, and him to see the bigger picture of my career and have the experience of managing big names and much bigger name. I wasn't a big name in my opinion, but big names in rugby and making decisions for them of what's best for their career, and seeking out his advice, and he never forced a decision on me. He just put all the opportunities out there, and we came to decisions to move to different clubs for those reasons. So I went to Brive, having left Leicester, and I'll never forget, obviously left a lot of good mates at Leicester, and they went on to win the league the next year. Of course they did after I left, but that's sport, right? And I'll never forget, I was driving to a game in France, and it was, we'd gone on a run of 4 defeats, playing for Brive, and we were playing one of the other teams down the bottom of the league. And I remember speaking to Jordan Murphy, who was a good mate of mine, and I said, "What are you doing this weekend?" He said, "Oh, we've gone up to Scotland to play golf. We're sending our second team to another game, and we've got the weekend off." So they were all up at St Andrews, and I had this envy of I could still be there, and I could be on that golf trip this weekend with the lads, but I'm driving to a relegation game. We were playing Dax in France, and it was going to be an absolute dogfight. And at that point, I'm like, well, I'm driving to a relegation battle here in France, and you're up at St Andrews. But then you have to make decisions at the time based on availability, what's on the table for you. Is that a 1-year deal? Is it a 2-year deal? Is it a 3-year deal? And security of your own life, really. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I go to France for the experience and the lifestyle." Well, yes, that's part of it, but you're not going there to earn less money. And it's a vulgar thing to talk about, but in any job, in any walk of life, people sum up their own career paths and what they want to do and how much they want to earn and what their value is or what offers are on the table for doing pretty much the same job, playing for one team or another, and that has to come into it. And that started with me moving to France, and then knock-on effect of that was moving around a few different clubs after that as well.
Players didn't do that, I don't believe, as much when you were playing, move around different clubs. But it looks like they are doing so more and more now. Is that a salary cap thing where they're just, if you want to earn good money, you might have to go to another club because they've got room in a cap and others don't?
Yeah, it's a little bit of your value to a different team. Now, I knew my value, and I was paid well at Leicester for sort of Leicester wages. But I knew that I was never going to get a mega deal there, because I'd come through the academy, and it was one of my big things at Leicester was there was always rumours about a bigger fly half coming in, a bigger name, a Juan Hernandez, Stephen Jones, Johnny Wilkinson, like big names of international stature, and you fight that battle. You keep in the jersey, you're waiting to see who comes through the door, if anyone does come, and your performances have got to try and push the club to not want to sign someone like that. In your position, and you've got to show your value that way as well. But the reality of it is sometimes you get more value by moving, and you've got to sum that up as when I was at Leicester across those 10 years. Yes, I did move to Saracens for 18 months and then moved back. But in those 6 years, in my second stint, I was offered a lot more money to go somewhere to other places that I didn't take. Because Leicester was the right place for me in my career, and wanting to learn and improve and be at the top end of the Premiership and try and win things. I had international aspirations that if I thought I was at another club, I wouldn't potentially fulfil. And so you make decisions on the hoof as you're going through your contract cycle. But in reality, players move now for different reasons. Yes, there is the salary cap issue. There's the big debate at the minute around players playing in England for England, and if you play outside of England, you can't. And part of that was down to a few of us that went to France.
So were you still able to play for England then?
Yeah, well, ironically...
Even though you're playing abroad, but
yeah,
you couldn't do that now?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, I left Leicester because I thought, I'll never play for England again.
Oh, right.
The coach, Brian Ashton, at the time, when I left Leicester, he wasn't picking me. And you kind of got to be pretty honest with yourself around... when you're a professional sportsman or sports person, what are your drivers? Are your drivers to get to the very top? Are your drivers to earn as much money as possible? Are your drivers to win as many medals as you can? And ultimately for me, that the England coach at the time, I thought I was good enough to be in the England squad. Other players were getting picked ahead of me, and basically it was when Johnny Wilkinson was injured, right? So I'm honest in the fact that I never thought I should have got picked ahead of Johnny, but there were other players within the squad that I thought I should have got picked instead of, on form and what you were achieving at your at club level. But Brian Ashton was the head coach, and I wasn't his kind of player, which is fine because that's his prerogative as a head coach. And he was a brilliant coach, a real forward thinker. I had a lot of experience with Brian over my career, but he was like, no, you're not in the picture. So then when Breathe came in, and it was a case of tripling my salary, going to experience something different, a 3-year contract, whereas I only had a year offer from Leicester. So you sum those things up and look at them, and I thought, I've played for England. The coach has said I'm not in the picture, so I need to make this decision for me, and obviously financial reasons and lifestyle reasons, and I'm at ease with if I don't play for England ever again. I have done it. Whether I did it that well or not, I don't know. But I had that opportunity, and I can't see that coming back. So I took the opportunity. Then obviously Brian Ashton leaves and Martin Johnson gets the job, and that changes things. And Jono had seen what I'd done over in Breathe. He tried a few things with the England squad, and he needed some experience to come back into it. And he phoned me up. He said, "I want you to come back into the squad." So that was at the time when there was a few of us out in France playing for French clubs, but we could come back and play for England at the time.
What year would that have been?
2008, 2009.
2009. So that rule is a relatively new rule that you have to play in England to play for England.
Yeah, I'd say, newish, probably 15 years.
So it came in not long after that, basically.
Yeah, and I remember being on a training camp, so pre-Six Nations training camp. We were in Portugal. And there's the whole World Rugby regulation around the windows and when you have to be with your clubs and when you can get released to play for your country. And England always went on a pre-Six Nations camp a week before the first game. So actually technically 2 weeks before the first game. The build-up to the week of the test match, you're in camp. But the week before that, when there were Premiership games or... they've changed the season slightly now, so it's the Premiership Cup games or whatever. But there were top 14 games, there were Premiership games at the time, and there was an agreement that for the English players, you didn't play in that last game before the Six Nations if you're in the squad. But they couldn't control the players that played in France. So I remember I spoke to the CEO at Breathe, who was an English gentleman, Simon Gillam, really nice guy, and he wanted me to play for England. And he said, "Look, I want you to go and be part of that England squad, but you have to come back at the weekend and play for Breathe because we're playing Cast away. It's a big game around Heineken Cup qualification and everything that goes with that." And I said, I'll be in the squad. I don't know whether I'll get picked. So he said, "Go over there, train and see what happens." So went over there, training flew over on the Sunday, trained on the Monday, trained on the Tuesday. Jono came up to me and he said, "You're starting for England next week against Italy." I said, "Oh, amazing!" Pumped. Yeah. There was a big thing around. Danny Cipriani had a blow up with one of the coaches, got sent home on the trip.
Surely not.
On a disagreement around what he should and shouldn't be doing in training, and there was an injury to, I think it might have been Toby Flood, and Jono was like, "You've trained well, I'm backing you. You're going to start next week.
Yeah.
I said, okay, cool. Amazing. Thanks, Jono. He said, there is a problem now with, I want you to train with the team all week. So I then have to get on the phone to Breathe, my club, and Simon Gillam, the chief exec. I said, look, I've been picked and Jono wants me to stay. He said, we're playing Cast this weekend. Let me speak to the coach. So he speaks to the Breathe head coach, and they were like, no, you coming back, you've got to play World Rugby regulation. And rightly so, they were my employer. So that started a kind of, not an issue, but it started a kind of
There's
problem
conflict
around
there,
conflict.
there?
And event, I said to Simon, I said, look, Jono wants me to stay. It's my dream playing for England. We've had this conversation. And he eventually said, you're employed by Breathe. You need to get back here. So I went to Jono, and Jono said, yeah, that's what you got to do. So off you go. He said, just try not to get injured. So I'm like, Jono, if you've ever seen me play, which you had, I'll avoid contact at all costs. So I went back there thinking I'm starting for England a week on Saturday against Italy if I don't get injured. But I've got to play in this crunch game for Breathe away at Cast. And the club weren't happy with me because we're in Portugal, and I missed a training session that I should have been back for. And so it annoyed the French head coach. And I'm kind of in the middle a little bit here because my full desire was to play for England, but also I was on a good contract with Breathe, and my loyalty should have been with them as well. And it was, but you're sort of in the middle and torn between the two. So I went back and played for Breathe. I was awful.
Try not to get injured.
Yeah. And I'm happy to admit it now. I got substituted after about 65 minutes. I've never been happier to be pulled off the field, which isn't the right motivation, right? But I remember sitting on the coach after the game and thinking, I'm fit, like I'm not injured. I've got through the game. I text Jono and said, I've got through the game, I'm fine. He was like, good, see you tomorrow. And all I was concerned about was getting home, back to Breathe, and then flying back to England to be part of the England squad, because it's a huge motivating factor, right? And that started a little bit of an issue with the kind of relationship with the club and England. And there was a couple of other players. I remember Jamie Noon, I think, got picked as well out there. Ricky Flutie, Steve Thompson. There's a few of us.
So it wasn't just your fault that this rule
No, but I think part of it was I think I was kind of a starter to that. In terms of the issue. Because I was probably one of the first ones to do it. I think, in fact, I was the first one to be picked while playing in a different country. And, obviously then players looked at it and went, you can get picked for England by playing abroad.
Right.
And so more players left. Johnny Johnny went to play for Toulon. And, then they brought in the rule around you have to play in England to play for England. And at that point, I knew, that my career was kind of done with England. And I was okay with that, because that's the decision I'd made, a long-term decision of going to play in France for financial reasons as much as life experience. But it was a big kind of pull on the England jersey. But I'd made peace with the fact that I thought when I left Leicester I was never going to do it again. So it was more of a bonus. So I can see the big arguments for and against it. When you play in England, they pay for the right to control the player at club level, not in terms of what they do in a club environment, but when they have control of them from an England perspective. So they can say, you're not going to play these weekends around the autumn internationals, around the Six Nations, and control the player load and work together with the clubs. And there's been a lot of sort of headbutting between clubs and England around, how much is that value worth, and how much should a player play, and all that stuff. But I suppose COVID has worked out, and the finances of the game now, that it's better to work together than work against each other, which they have done for years. And whilst there are other reasons for players wanting to go abroad, England have got the best interests of themselves and their league at the forefront, and their league being the Premiership, to try and say we want the best players playing in England if they want to play for their country. And I see both sides of the argument, and I'd be a bit of a hypocrite if I just sat here and said, you should just let any player go and play for any club. Because when you see it from where I've seen it as a player, where a coach hasn't got control and wants you to train with the team, but then, you have to go and play for another club. It's really hard to control. So, it's an impossible situation that players want to have the best of both worlds, but actually going and playing in France, you work a lot harder, there's more risk of injury, you play a lot more games, it's a lot more physical at times, and you're not as well looked after. And there's a long history of players going and playing abroad and pretty quickly realising it's not all it's dressed up to be at times.
It's almost one of the things that's so super obvious about when the Welsh players, for example, go abroad, is they are back within one contract normally.
Yeah, and because a lot of them, and they were probably the prime examples. And I remember speaking to a load of lads that played in Wales or in Ireland and go, you boys get looked after so well. You don't play as much. And whether that's a good thing, for some players it's not a good thing.
They want to play
because players want to play all the time. But you go and experience something in France where you're playing a ridiculous amount of games. You have a very short pre-season, which sometimes is great if you don't like pre-season. But some players love pre-season because it gets them primed for a whole year. And other players hated long pre-seasons. I went on tour with England in 2009 to Argentina. Came back from the tour, had a long season. So I played for Brive all year, played in the Six Nations. Went on tour with England at the end of the season, got back in probably early July, and our season was starting in August in France because that's how they did it. So I got back and they were like, right, you've got 2 weeks to do some running and then you're playing.
It's probably suited you that though, didn't it? You were
I loved
biggest
it.
fan of long pre-seasons and extra fitness.
I mean, I loved it, but in reality, that was great for me, but not great for other players. So I came back from tour in Argentina and we got back to Brive, and our season started in August. I think it was something like the 20th of August. I had a 2-week pre-season. Didn't really get a holiday, a break away, so I had a week or something, and then it was straight back in. So you end up near enough playing all year round, which I loved, by the way, because I hated long pre-seasons and all that stuff. But it's not good. I was at the time I was 28, 29, and so it's okay at that kind of age. But if you're doing that for 12 or 15 years, your body will give up. So you need the preparation time. You need a decent pre-season, as I'd had it earlier in my career. And so it's that fine balance of playing for a French team that wants their pound of flesh, and rightfully so, because they're paying for the right to have that, and they want to, they want you to be motivated to play for them every week if they can. And it boils back down to value of a player and the value for the club of that player. I look back at certain players in their careers and they're amazing players that are paid a lot of money, but then a club will look at them and go, we've only had 10 games out of him this year. So when you sort of look at the value of that player, of how much it costs per game,
it's huge,
that's where them clubs make tough decisions on people. They're like, why are they letting him go? Well, he's only played 10 games this year. So, if you're paying him 300 grand, you're equating that to 30 grand a game.
It's more than an England fee.
Well, they look for value in different ways as well, don't they? So, understandably, when you've done it yourself, it's hypocritical to say, "Oh, you should only play in England if you want to play for England." Which, having had both sort of feet, having a foot in each camp where I've done it and I've seen it from the other side. The demands on your body are huge playing in France, and rightly so. Clubs want you to play as much as possible to get value out of you for what they're paying you week in, week out. So you can't have the best of both worlds. Welsh players, as you mentioned, have tried that and realised actually they got much better looked after in Wales with the amount of games they play and the control over that and building towards a Six Nations or towards an autumn internationals. Same in Ireland now. The Ireland players, and maybe it's a strength and a weakness when you talk about World Cups and getting past big knockout games or whatever. But in terms of their management of their body and their game time and longevity potentially of their careers, the Irish players are in a great system. Where they don't play anywhere near as much rugby as anyone else. And the big thing around rugby now is how much everyone plays, and it's too much on the body, especially with the way the game's gone, the physicality of it and the demands of that. So there's never a right answer. Players want to go and earn as much money as possible. I agree with that. But also, going to France and thinking you're going to play for England all the time, if that was a door that was open, there's way more risk playing in France, I think, to getting injured and then not having that ability to play for England anyway. So
would that not be an argument for opening the doors then? Because if it's you're not necessarily going to play for England, but it gives England the opportunity to pick maybe the very best or most important players to the team.
Potentially, but I suppose the big worry for England is the lack of control of players. And now England work really closely with the clubs and the S&C teams at each club around player loads, player welfare, how much they train, play, what their programme is to improve themselves on certain aspects. And in doing that, you lose that ability to communicate with a French club as well as you can with an English club and what is best for that player. And the goal is for players to play for England, and the clubs are, they want them to play for their clubs as much as possible as well. But there's a working relationship there between both, whereas with a French club wouldn't care about England.
Yeah.
They facilitate each other in this country, the club and the national team, with what they pay for the right to control the players, but also having the players' best interests at heart and not just segregating. The French club would only have the French club's best interests at heart. And prime example, probably at the minute, is you look at Sia Khaleesi, who's, I watched him play for South Africa, and he's playing some of the best rugby he's
Different
played.
player.
Yeah. And the French club, Racing, and his owner, Jackie Lorenzetti, came out and made some comments about him. And he feels he's not getting the same Sia Khaleesi that plays for South Africa. And that's perhaps a different question around playing for South Africa and what it means to those guys. But also, these guys, you can't play at the top level week in, week out and get to those real emotional levels that you can in certain games and World Cups and everything like that. Whereas a club owner wants to see him doing that every week for 80 minutes. And injuries come and go and form and all that stuff over a long period and a long season, but you're never going to be able to have the best interest of the player at heart if you're not working together. And a French club and a South African nation, or a French club and an English nation, aren't ever going to want to work together for obvious reasons. There's no benefit to the French club if the international's off for a certain amount of weeks a year playing for a country that's not theirs.
Is there an argument that it would benefit the national team, we'd build more depth if we did allow some of the very best players to go abroad and still play for England, which would allow more players to come through? And I'm thinking of South Africa as an example. They're the most successful international team in recent years. They've had players playing all over the world, and everyone would say they've probably got the most depth of any international team. But I never hear the argument that England might be able to replicate that using the same sort of system.
Yeah, I think the big thing, and you're seeing a lot of players go back to South Africa now.
Yeah.
So the big issue, I think, and I think it's possibly by luck than judgment. Financially, the South African clubs couldn't compete or weren't in a great place a few years back. So these players went to take bigger contracts abroad in France, in England, in Japan. And they allowed the players to go and do that because it suited them. They didn't have the funds to control the players and pay the players in their own country. And that obviously naturally led to a lot of other players coming through on lesser wages and more players being available. You've got to remember, it's a religion in South Africa, rugby. It's not religion in England. And I mean that respectfully. South Africa kids want to play rugby.
Yeah.
Don't want to play football necessarily, or some do, but the main driver is rugby. It is their number one sport. So everyone wants to be a Sia Khaleesi. Everyone wants to be an Ebenezer, a Cheslin Colby, because that is their national sport. Whereas in England, that's not the same. But it's worked well for them because they couldn't afford to keep those players at the time playing for the Bulls, the Sharks, the Stormers, etc. But that allowed the players to go off, and a new generation of players came through. And so we're now seeing a lot of players having played abroad, going back to South Africa because financially they're in a bit of a better place, but also they've realised that playing for their country is number one, and the way to do that, and the older you get looking after your body, it's important to be in an environment there that looks after you. We've seen Evan Epser we've seen Ebenezer go back, we've seen Billy LaRue go back. A number of players. Trevor Nyakani, one of the best props in the world, has been at Racing. He's now going back. Vincent Cox played in Saracens, in Wasps, in France. He's gone back because they understand the demands on their body, and you can't do it year on year. You can do it for a year or two, but you can't do it 6-7 year stint doing that. And so it's then the longevity. How much do you want to play for South Africa? How much do you want to have a longer international career? And the more you're playing away from that country, and the bigger demands on your body and all that stuff, put that at risk, I suppose.
Why isn't rugby more popular in England? I've made this argument to a friend of mine before, where I said, if you took someone who's never seen any football, never seen any rugby, and you got them to watch both games, I'm pretty sure they would find the rugby more interesting. There's a lot more going on. I'm a football fan as well, but watching the Euros, and a lot of it's been very, very boring.
Yeah.
There's just so much more happening in rugby. And I suppose the model would be that the NFL, which is the closest equivalent in the US, is the most popular sport. It's what people watch. I feel like there should be an alternative world, maybe, where that would be possible in England for rugby to occupy that space. Think there's any chance that anything like that could ever happen?
I hope there is, because I love the game, and it's a brilliant game, and it's given me great joy and a lot of in my life around what I do. But I think a lot of it boils down to, you start a passion as a kid playing sport, right? And you don't start sport at 5-6 years old, whatever age you start at, even later, necessarily to say I want to play for England or I want to play for Ireland or whatever country and be a British and Irish Lion. You're doing it because you love it, and you keep going back because you love doing it. Now, there's obviously a load of issues around the game with the risks and the dangers, which parents have seen, and concussions, and our parents as pushy's probably the wrong word, but our parents as driven to get their kids to play the sport. It's played less in schools now. Now, my mum was a teacher at a comprehensive school in Coventry, which was very strong in my era of going to school at rugby. Some amazing players who have gone on to be professionals came out of that school, a state school in Coventry. And there was a number of state schools in Coventry that produced professional players that play for England: Neil Back, Tom Wood, Leon Lloyd, Danny Grucock. Guys that went to state schools because the state schools played a lot and had masters of sport or head of rugbies that drove that ambition and drove a program. Now it's come away on the syllabus, I think, and a lot less schools are playing it. And people talk about rugby being elitist. It's a private school game or a public school game, and there's issues around that. But it comes down to investment and getting it into communities, getting it back into syllabuses where you're not talking about the risks of playing rugby. You're talking about the joys of what you get from it. And being part of a team and all that stuff, and the benefits that it gives you playing a game. And I'm biased because I love it and I've played it, and what being part of a team and identity and the lessons and behaviours you learn from that stand you in great stead in different walks of life later on, whether you make it to the top or whether you don't. And ultimately, I think it's not a sport now that's pushed as an option to participate in it as a kid, unless your parents are wanting you or giving you that opportunity to do it on a weekend at a club if you're not at a school that plays it. And a lot less schools are playing rugby now than did when I grew up. And therefore you're missing a huge catchment of kids that they've never picked up a rugby ball because they don't know about it. They don't know the joys that you can get from that if you don't try it. And unfortunately, I think that's an issue with society at the minute around rugby and around other sports where there's less opportunity. I played every sport when I was a kid, and my parents gave me that opportunity by taking me to stuff. And it's how I parent my kids now, around giving them the opportunities. I'm not going to force them to do stuff, but I'll give them the opportunities to play sport, and if they like it, I'll always take them or facilitate getting them there so they can go and enjoy it. Because I think being a kid now and being active, and it's easy not to be active, right? looking at social media or getting in front of a screen, all that stuff. We didn't have that as kids. There wasn't iPads, there wasn't iPhones, there wasn't. There was 5 TV channels when I was growing up. Now there's everything at their disposal, and it's easy just to put them in front of a screen. So before, when I was growing up, parenting was, what we're doing at the weekend. We're playing rugby, we're playing cricket, we're playing any sports, getting you active. And I think that's brilliant for kids, but it's less so in how society is now, I think.
Do you think we need increased participation, particularly among children, for rugby to be a more popular spectator sport, though? Because I think of examples like the UFC. There's almost no participation from kids in that.
Yeah.
But it's become enormously successful and watched the world over in a space of about 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate kind of gladiatorial, get yourself in an octagon and try and knock the life out of someone else. And that gives me the fear, right? But I love watching it.
Yeah.
And, same with boxing. I remember when we were in pre-seasons and stuff, you'd do boxing sessions, not sparring, but pad sessions, and they were awful.
Right.
Like really tough. But then the kind of respect you get from you see people going into a ring and thinking, we've done a few bag sessions for 20 minutes where you're on bags hitting, you can't hold your arms up.
Yeah.
You've got someone trying to knock you out. But that's why people want to watch that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so gladiatorial. And that's where we need to, I think, drive rugby as well. Rugby's people talk about the concussion element and the the CTE side of stuff and everything that goes with that. But people want to watch gladiators go at each other and celebrate big hits, celebrate a little man skinning a big man, or a big man smashing a little man, or that physical confrontation, because it's what sports fans can't actually do themselves or at that level. I watch every sport, and whether it's tennis, whether it's F1, whether it's darts or whatever, I'll watch any sport and think I can't do that. But it's amazing to watch people at that level who have been committed to getting to that level and showing those qualities. So, I think we need to celebrate rugby for what it is. It's a great game. It's a physical game. Can't get away from it. You don't want to change it too much so that it's not what we know it as. But you need to make it player welfare at the sort of centre of every sort of decision you're making, but also celebrate the brutality of it. Because that's what brings people to watch. The generation now of watching things on clips on social media, they want to see elements of skill, they want to see big hits, they want to see amazing tries, flick passes, whatever. But you also, I watch things on social media, and what gets me to flick back is seeing something that I can't do, or a big impact in a game, whether it's a screamer in football, or if it's we saw in darts, I think it was a couple of years ago, the 9-dart finish when they were both on a 9-darter and things like that brings you to watch stuff, and then you have to try and get that hook in of them watching it week to week. And listen, the rugby fan base is an ageing fan base probably that go to games. Yeah. And that's a big worry for the game.
Yeah.
Gen Z or whatever people call them, I don't like all those terms, but the younger generation of kind of 18 to 25s, or maybe 18 to 25s, are they willing to spend their money going to watch a club game? Possibly not, when you can flick and watch everything on social media. But it's participation and starting off a passion at a younger age, I think, is massively important, which is, I think, on the decrease, because unless your parents want to take you to a club game, a club on a Sunday and pick up a rugby ball, not enough kids are playing it in schools now. And that's a big thing around the syllabus, around the dangers of the game and the risk averseness, how we've gone in society, I think.
Because I've got a marketing background, and if I was charged with marketing rugby in this country, I think I'd be like, let's do away with this being a participation sport. I think that's going to go. Like, I think of my own example. I enjoyed playing rugby when I was younger.
Yeah.
I stopped playing when I got to university because it was just too physical. I'm a small guy, and I was just like, felt like I was doing damage to my body, basically. Yeah. And obviously, people's lines where they set that as a different levels. And for me, all through school, it was fine. I got to that level, and I was like, this is too much. And my wife will not be very happy with my son playing, or 3-year-old son. If he goes on to play rugby, she would not want him to. I'd be injury risk. Yeah, injury risk. So I think the participation thing is gonna go and gonna drop down, but I don't think that needs to be linked to a decline in the popularity of the sport, because I feel like I'd go the other way with it. I'd be like, this is an incredibly physical sport. It's only for those people that are really into that.
It's not for everyone.
It's not for everyone. Yeah. You know, the pitch to 16-year-old lads would be, come and play this and you can smash your mates to bits.
Yeah.
That would be, you know, how I'd promote it. All the clips would be compilations of big hits and things like that. And I'd be tempted to go that way, which it seems like the sport is not trying to. They're trying to hold on to the other side of it.
It's on a balance, because, you know, for everything that you're saying there as a dad and someone that loves the game and a marketeer, and that is how I see the game. But the other side is your wife, you're saying she wouldn't want her son playing rugby. So automatically you've got that battle at home around what is best for your son or daughter to play the game. Right. And so I completely get both sides of the argument. So rugby and the powers that be in rugby are struggling to know which side to go on. Do we say, this game's really safe, and, you know, come on mums or come on dads that don't want your kids to play rugby, allow them to do it via touch or via this or via that to grow a passion for the kid, but to play the game, or do you go down the other route, which I think we should celebrate how great the game is, put some big hits on, celebrate what the game is. It's not for everyone. Not everyone wants to play it, but you can't. I don't think you can sit in the middle and not appease everyone, but you can't sit in the middle and do nothing to either side, right? Because then you just sort of carry on in the same trajectory, and it becomes a game that alienates a lot of people, or there's not enough interest in it because you're not doing one or the other. So it's a tough balance. I don't know what the right balance is. You're a marketer. You've been very successful, so let's go with your way.
Because I'd like to think that my son, whether or not he does play, he will still watch.
Yeah.
Because I'm into it, and I'll probably show him. Yeah. And so it's almost like maybe we don't need to have these things be joined at the hip.
Yeah. And it's a hard one, isn't it? Because, you know, some parents, and there is a responsibility on the parents to protect your kids, but also give them the opportunities to try stuff that they, if you don't try, you don't know. So if the parent's just making the decision of, my son or daughter will never play rugby, you're not allowing that kid to experience something, and he might love it or she might love it and grow from that. But I completely understand why some parents, you know, I won't have the same debate in my household. My partner, she's not sporty whatsoever. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. She's never had an interest in it. But, you know, that's something that you've got to navigate as... And I believe... I had my career. My parents facilitated a lot of my career by just giving me opportunities to go and play sport as a kid, which I threw myself into and loved. And I suppose you parent a little bit from your own experiences, and giving kids as many opportunities as possible is something that you need to, I believe, allow kids to live and learn by.
3 Premiership clubs went bust within the last 2 years. Did that surprise you, and do you think we'll see other ones go as well?
Didn't surprise me. It's very sad, and obviously 2 of them, or 3 of them, I nearly played for London Irish. I'd signed at one point for all 3 clubs. I spent 3 years at Worcester, loved the club, loved Cecil Duckworth, who will be looking down and seeing a lot of his work over many, many years, and his passion, more so than work, has gone now. It's incredibly sad, and same with Wasps and the history of that club, and how great that history was. Seeing that go to the wall as well is incredibly sad. Now, do I think there'll be more go? Hopefully not, but we're still not through the woods of it. Clubs have come to realise in 3 very sad, significant situations with Wasps, London Irish and Worcester going bust, that you've got to cut your cloth accordingly. And I know you've spoken to entrepreneurs and business people. Clubs for a long time spent money that wasn't coming through the door. And that has a longevity cycle and a period of, actually, this will only work for so long until something goes. And that's same in business, right?
Spend above your means.
Yeah,
it's not going to end well.
And you can do that for a period of time to get to growth and all that stuff, and then it turns.
But the growth has to come.
It has to come.
And if it doesn't, you're in trouble.
Rugby for too long there was the issue around Saracens and the salary cap and what happened, with that, and all these other clubs made their own decisions spending the money they spent, but undoubtedly they were linked to chasing success and chasing teams that potentially were going and spending way more than, and that's business, right? You look at some successful businesses in industries where there's some businesses that have spent way more to get to a point, and others have tried to do it in an organic way and haven't got the success in the short term that other businesses in the same industry have. Now, clubs have the right to do it how they want within the boundaries of what the salary cap was meant to be there for, which was to protect the game and make clubs spend within their means, but also be competitive and have a kind of level playing field around the competition that anyone can win. Because you don't want one team just winning the league year on year on year, because that doesn't then allow, in your marketeer background, it doesn't allow growth, does it?
It's not as exciting a product.
No. And so, those three clubs have all gone bust for different reasons, but rugby's relied for far too long on rich benefactors plugging a deficit, right? Which has a shelf life. In terms of, that benefactor, it might be committed for 5-10 years, but then his life or her life circumstances might change and think
their business propping up changes or
die. I take Breve as a classic example. So, and I was lucky at the time. Breve was bought as a club by, I think he was something like, it was a guy called Daniel de Richebourg, but he was something like the 6th richest guy in France.
Right, okay.
And he bought a business, which was a scrap metal business, that owned Breve. But when he bought the scrap metal business, he didn't know that he'd bought the rugby club, right?
Oh, by the way.
Yeah, and that's what happened. So he went and said, they've gone through the due diligence, eventually, you own a rugby club as well. And he had no idea about rugby whatsoever. So he said to people within his business, he said, look, what's this rugby club? What do we do? And he looked at the history of Breve, and Breve in the late 90s were one of the best teams in Europe. They won the what is now the Champions Cup, the Heineken Cup at the time. They got to a final, lost as well to Bath. They beat Leicester as well in a final. And he said, right, I want to try and get them back to the glory days. So he employed a few people, and he said, right, I want us to get back, and invested a load of money, paid, probably, being honest, paid over the odds for some players like myself. There's a number of players that went there on salaries that you wouldn't get anywhere else, because he wanted to get them back into that competition, and then had a plan to put more money in to try and win it, because he was a very rich bloke that, and there's a number of them in the sport that it's a bit of a vanity project, right?
Of course, yeah.
And so they want to buy their way to success, or they just want the success, and I'm the owner and this is great. So he put a load of money in and paid us, more than we'd earn anywhere else, which was fine by him at the time. But then a lot of his businesses turned the other way, and his board of directors looked at him and said, you're spending 10 or 12 million quid that you're losing each year, 10 or 12 million euros that you're losing each year on this rugby club. You need to stop that.
Yeah.
And so they voted that he had to get rid of the club. And so he sold it to one of his friends for a euro. And then as soon as he took on the debt and everything that went with it, he said, right, we need to cut our cloth accordingly. So you all need to take a 25% pay cut. And then we had this big thing at the club. We're like, no, this is my contract.
Yeah.
So the
it's
French,
I'm getting paid that.
And it became an issue. So then ultimately it quickly changed to, and there's loads of stories in France of this happening with a rich owner that all of a sudden has had enough and, then doesn't want to invest, and the club goes down. The Pan Biarritz is a great example.
Yeah.
Who were a powerhouse, in the mid 2000s.
Could you argue that's fine because it just makes way for another club?
Yeah, it's sport, but it's not sustainable sport, is it? If you're a fan of that club. So, in reality, Breve then weren't paying top wages, wouldn't get top players, got relegated, and then it's the whole thing around supply and demand. If you're playing in the league below, are you going to get the sponsors? Are you going to get the revenue back in? Are you going to get supporters come in as much to watch a team in Pro D does you do in the top 14 when you've got Toulouse coming to town? And it's the same in the Premiership, right? So going back to the 3 clubs that went bust, it's incredibly sad, but they made their own financial decisions to get them to that point.
Yeah.
And they were influenced by, I'm happy to say it, Saracens breaking the salary cap and doing what they did.
Yeah, yeah.
But that was their way of doing it, and they got away with it for long enough, and they had the success. And they were, we all celebrated how good they were, but the knock-on effect of that with other clubs chasing it, and I'll make the point, those clubs made their own decisions to spend their own money, and then
because you still can't, like I think of my marketing agency, right? And there's other marketing agencies with 100 times the staff budget of mine. I can't try and spend and then say to my wife like, oh, sorry, they spend more, we went bankrupt, what are we going to do?
Exactly.
It's not an excuse to do that. But I take your point that obviously they're trying to compete with that top level. What do you think to the argument salary cap wise of? I sort of have this idea of imagine if you just completely got rid of it.
Yeah.
Yes, you're going to have some massive disparity between the clubs, but you might have, let's say, Bath, Bristol, Saracens spending 15 million a year on players, hire the best players from all around the world, bring in loads of clubs that it could be, bring in loads of eyeballs because they've got Dupont and Colby and all these players. Could there be a world in which that could work, do you think?
Yes and no,
right.
If that's an answer.
Okay.
Yes, in a sense of short term, and clubs have tried it, right? Toulon had the Galacticos in France.
Yeah.
Does that lead to longevity? And you mentioned something earlier around if one team's winning the competition the whole time, it's
boring
and way less marketable.
You'd need to have at least a few that were willing to do that.
And in reality, if you've got clubs like Bath and Saracens and Bristol, I'm trying to think of any others.
They'd probably be the obvious ones that would.
Yeah, they would
if they could, wouldn't they? Because of the owners.
And would a league where you're winning, you've got let's take Bristol, and actually they've changed their business model. Bristol, they've stopped signing these big players.
Yeah,
because they didn't have their success, did they?
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to do it a little bit more organically now and living within their means a bit. Because I wouldn't say Steve Lansdown's appetite has diminished for winning things, but his business model has probably changed around.
Okay.
They spent a load of cash. Same with Wasps. Go back a few years. Wasps had Curtly Beale, George Smith, Vinny LaRue, Danny Cipriani.
That crazy backline.
Yeah. And they didn't win the title, and that was a big driver. So, but then the knock-on effect, those guys leave, take contracts elsewhere because they are global superstars. There's no succession planning of that club, and it's then how you've had a George Smith, you've had a Vinny LaRue, you've had a Curtly Beale, you've had these massive names. Has it inspired more people to come watch the game? Yes, but when they've gone, what's the knock-on effect after that? And the same with those big 3 spending clubs. If you look at the 3 owners or the group of owners at Saracens, and then Bruce Craig and Steve Lansdown, they could, if there wasn't a salary cap, they could blow the market up and sign the best players in the world. But then you've got 3 clubs, and it would only be you then perhaps lose interest from other clubs because they know they can't compete with those 3. So does the league then have a value to it because it's just going to be, right, who's going to win out of those 3? And all the other games are going to be 60 points, 70 points, 80 points.
Boring.
Potentially. So...
and I guess it's different to football because obviously we have that in football, but I suppose with football, because it's a much lower scoring game, you have the opportunity for the minnow to have a shot at the king and have a realistic chance of nicking a 1-0 or a 0-0.
I mean, I think in rugby we have to be careful around comparing ourselves to football.
Okay.
Football's a global game. Rugby's a global game. Football's a global game where, and the reason there's so much money in Premier League football, and I'll take Bournemouth as an example as a football club. I think their stadium's something like 14,000 capacity.
Yeah, small. It might be smaller than that.
Yeah,
it's
they're
small.
not paying Premier League wages on what's coming through the door on match days and sponsorship.
Yeah.
From the kind of regular, they're paying the Premier League wages and living how they live as a football club because of the TV revenue deal and what comes in globally from that.
Yeah.
Because, you go to any place in the world, they want to watch the Premier League.
Yeah.
So the TV rights are, you take that TV deal away and clubs go bust overnight on what they're spending to what's coming through the door. And that's, a consequence of how great that game is globally. Rugby hasn't got that demand. So, I played it around the world. I played for the Sharks in South Africa in Super Rugby. And I'd tune in to watch the Premiership games when I'm playing out there. But if you go into other countries now, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, how many people, and likewise, how many people now watch Super Rugby?
Yeah.
Not many, from England.
Yeah.
So how many people are
I'm
watching
a
it?
rugby fan, I don't.
Yeah, but I'd say 10 or 12 years ago, you probably would. Or a lot of people would have watched Super Rugby. Likewise.
Or at least had an idea what was going on, who was with. I couldn't tell you anything.
Yeah. And in other countries, so strong rugby nations like South Africa, like New Zealand as the main two outside of our little Six Nations enclave of what we think's big over here. How many people in England watch the top 14 in France? And it's the closest sort of foreign league.
And it's like the big
and
league.
There's some superstars in there and all that. The access and the demand for it isn't huge. So therefore the TV revenue rights deal isn't as big. Likewise, the Premiership, and you look at the Premiership or the Champions Cup, how many people in South Africa or New Zealand or Australia want to watch that for the demand? So the money flowing in via a TV deal is nowhere near as big because the demand isn't as big globally. And that's the thing that I think needs to drive focus around how to increase revenues, of how to A, align the game globally, but B, look at the game and how to market it to places that don't necessarily have the demand for it, and build up revenue that way potentially. But it is we've got to stop comparing ourselves to football or looking at football as the be all and end all, because it's a completely different game, I think, in terms of the demand and the global demand and what revenues are made off the back of it, because of the TV rights deals.
Yeah, and I think actually, talk about changes to salary cap and stuff. You'd have to argue at the moment. Well, I would certainly argue like the product in the Premiership is fantastic. Like the rugby's awesome.
Best it's ever been.
So good.
Yeah,
so
I
it's
think.
like, I'm suggesting things to change it. It's like, well, why would you? Because that's great. But the salary cap is going up though. Does that make you a bit nervous? Do you think clubs can get in trouble?
A little bit, yeah. But hopefully the shock of what's happened to the 3 clubs that have gone bust will mean that people berate Newcastle a little bit. Newcastle spend within their means.
Yeah.
They've lost every game in the league last year. So is it a snowball effect of you're losing every game, so you're not getting people through the door? And I played at Newcastle in relegation battles when I came out of retirement, and there was more people that wanted to come to a Friday night game to watch a potential relegation battle.
Yeah.
Same when I was at Worcester.
Because you've got the jeopardy, is what you're saying.
Jeopardy, they market it as, we need you, it's a big game, so more people come and watch, and you get more bums on seats, you get more people through the door, more revenue, all that stuff. Then there's no jeopardy. And I don't need to go and watch Newcastle this week because they've lost every game and they're not going to get relegated or whatever. So it's a hard balance between ring fencing the league to secure those clubs, but also helping those clubs grow, because you need jeopardy in sport to get people excited about going to watch it.
So would you not like to see promotion relegation back? We're going to have a playoff, aren't we, now?
I think it's a necessity. But then the other argument is
I'd like to see it.
The gap between, and I think it is coming in from next year, if the club that wins the championship fits the criteria in the Premiership, which they've I think they've changed the criteria now.
Because that was prohibitive before, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think there was only Doncaster this year that could have come up.
Yeah.
But the reality of rugby is the disparity now, and I played in the Championship when I was at Worcester for a year, the disparity now between the Premiership clubs and the Championship clubs is, the gap's wider than it's ever been. And so to be competitive, when I say competitive, I mean sort of being able to stay in the league, even if you finish 9th, that disparity is going to take a lot of money from an owner to fill the gap of everything that needs to be done at a club, not just from a squad perspective, paying the players, but logistically, the stadium, the club, how it's run as a whole, and operationally, how much you have to invest into a club to make it work on a weekend for a team is huge now compared to what it used to be.
So would you like to see the salary cap reduced to, say, 3 million or 2 million, a level at which all clubs would not be loss-making?
No. It's a really hard balance between... I don't think the salary cap should have gone up for next year.
So it should stay at, it's about 5.5 now, isn't it?
Because that you need a period of sustainability across... and this is me coming from a player that left Leicester to go and earn more money. And it's hard for players. And, you know, we've seen guys go to France and whatever. And that's all about earning more money and more security of the big contract, but also, you know, you make the money up from the big contract by playing for England, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The disparity between the two, but you can't have it both ways.
Because the fees for playing for England are significant.
Yeah. And I know, you know, they're bringing these hybrid contracts that will be announced soon around who's going to get them and the value, etc., which is a benefit to the players now, and it's kind of a middle ground. But I worry that with the salary cap going back up, you just go back to what we were and what clubs were doing. But I'm hopeful that the mistakes that were made of previous clubs and the 3 that have gone bust, and the reality of what happened during COVID and the knock-on effect of the learnings from all that stuff means that most clubs won't again go and spend beyond their means. You know, Leicester, historically the biggest rugby club in our country, from a club perspective, from not only winning things but fan base, size of the club, etc., etc. So, you know, Leicester, one of the biggest clubs historically in our country, had it not been for Peter Tom and Tom Scott, 2 of the main shareholders, putting in, I think it was around 12 or 13 million
Just
last year. But obviously for more shares around the club and more ownership, they would have gone into administration as well. Now, that's not saying that it doesn't matter that Wasps and London Irish and Worcester did that, but Leicester, as you know, being the most watched club in terms of regular,
it's the Manchester United, isn't it?
It is.
It'd be like the Manchester United doing that. Yeah.
So that goes to show that, you know, it's not just, you know, you could look at Worcester as a club that's not won the Premiership or not perceived as a massive club. London Irish potentially as well in terms of fan base, etc. And I know they're in Reading and how many people used to watch them. But Leicester, over the last however many years, have averaged above 20,000 people a weekend watching them, which is the most supported club on a regular basis. I know some of the other clubs have the big game at Quins and you know, they're all doing that sort of stuff as well. But you know, Saracens have their one at Wembley as well, which does pump the numbers up. But in reality, what you'd look at as the most stable club in terms of income coming through the door from fans and not having to rely on, you know, just one owner putting in a load of cash, they were nearly close to going into administration as well. So that shows that the model's broken, and the worry about the salary cap going back up is that, does it just lead us back down the path of clubs overspending again? You've hoped the lessons have been learnt of the 3 clubs very sadly going to the wall and, you know, not being part of the league anymore.
And if you had any more Premiership clubs go bust, you can't have a league with less than 10 teams, surely. No. So you'd need to be bringing up that then, to replace instantly, or whatever.
Or that away. Then, you know, makes conversations around, and I know there's always ongoing conversations around evolution of the game and the leagues, and you know, I know the Welsh teams have struggled, and they were like, well, let's get an Anglo-Welsh league together.
A couple of Welsh teams,
because we saw Cardiff have big numbers watching them play Bath, which used to be a big rivalry.
Yeah, of course.
In one of the European competitions this year, but you know, I think the same questions need asking around, and I said it myself on my podcast, that what is the value of bringing the Welsh teams into the Premiership when we've had a very strong Premiership? But we need to. So if you do go below 10 teams, you know, the league devalues itself even more. And then that knock-on effect in terms of the TV deal, the sponsorship deal, headline sponsors, the money that England pay, you know, with the professional game board agreement and all things like that. That that value then decreases as well. So, you're staring down the barrel further. So it's important, I think, for a period of stability, and sustainability is the big word of trying to make clubs live within their means, but also, yes, you want to be competitive and win the Champions Cup, but what's more important further down the line, having a club in 5-10 years' time, or being a London Irish or Wasps or a Worcester fan and you've got no club to watch at the weekend? And that is the stark reality of overspending in any business, but the stark reality of the professional game. We love the professional game, but that could go 10 years down the line. Do you want a game in 10 years? Or
it's not impossible. There could be no professional game, isn't it? Or maybe you just get paid to play for England, let's say.
And that's the big worry.
It's just amateur.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one that I feel like is a no-brainer. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on. Summer rugby.
Yeah.
Switching the season so that we play, I don't know, start at the end of the Six Nations and play through till whenever it would end up naturally being, September. You could align the Northern Hemisphere with the Southern Hemisphere, much easier that way. I feel like if you did that, you'd get more bums on seats because the weather's nicer, probably get people sticking around longer. If you had fan parks or whatever at the stadiums, they'd spend more money because the weather's nicer. What do you think about that?
I think it certainly needs aligning, the global season.
The two hemispheres.
Yeah, which we've been talking about for as long as we can remember now. I am a bit of a traditionalist, and a lot of people are traditionalists around the game, but to evolve the game and to grow the game, sometimes you do need to make changes that, like you say, allow more people to want to come out of their house. And on a cold winter's day, it's easier watching it on TV, isn't it?
Especially if you want to take your kids.
Yeah.
I've got a 3-year-old. I'm not going to take him when it's
-3.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the summer, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let's go.
And that is a big decision. There's a lot of traditionalists that are worried and fighting against it because of, you look at the Christmas period, for example, Quinn's big game.
Yeah.
You get all the families going to watch that. They sell it out at Twickenham. That's grown and grown and grown to the point of now it's sold out pretty much every year. And traditionally in our country and this side of the world, the winter period rugby is a winter game as well. And so the podcast that I do, Jim's a big advocate for summer rugby.
I've heard him say it.
And
You're not so sure.
I completely get the argument.
Yeah.
Does it alienate enough people? And people talk about it competing with cricket, but you're competing with football at the minute in the same thing. So
the Champions Cup final, the equivalent of the Champions League final, kicked off the same time as the FA Cup final.
Yeah,
in the same city.
The same city. Yeah,
it's just like, guys, what are you doing?
Yeah. And do you know what? It didn't have an effect on the numbers in the Champions Cup game because it was a sellout. But
TV audiences, right?
Yes, and logistically getting around London wasn't that easy that day. But that's that's an unfortunate thing around.
So you would get away from competing with football, wouldn't you, if you got that instead?
And I do think there's a huge argument for it. There's people way cleverer than me that are looking at this around, the TV rights deals around it, aligning everything. Do we move in the Northern Hemisphere to match the Southern Hemisphere? You then got the French argument, and the French TV deal is very big. That
it's probably the hardest one.
Everyone has to move, right, collectively, or you can't just have the Premiership saying that's what we want to do, but the French saying they can't. The Irish are involved, and the Scots and the Welsh, and everyone has to agree it. So you're going to have so many stakeholders and then you get arguments around people having their own bias and their own reasons for doing stuff. So I wish it was as easy as that. And it is a very solid argument, I think. The product around it. I remember when Super League changed to Rugby League changed to it, and I used to look at Super League and we'd watch the games on a Friday night because there wasn't a rugby game on the Friday night on TV. I remember watching all the massive games, St Helens, Wigan, Leeds, Bradford, all that stuff, and it was an obsession. And then, obviously, there was more rugby union on TV over weekends, Friday games, Saturday games, Sunday games on TV, and rugby league died a bit. And I don't know whether, and still now, it's never recovered. I don't think rugby league in terms of what it was.
In this country,
yeah.
Obviously
Sorry, yeah. I'm just talking about,
but
in this country. But then is that a consequence of something else, or is it a consequence of, moving it to what it is now, which is a summer game, even though it's not just over the summer, is it? It's played all the way through to kind of October, and it starts in still the winter months.
Our summer's not long enough to play a whole season.
And what is summer? I mean, we've had 2 days of summer. That's it now. But,
exactly.
Yeah. Listen, I completely get the argument, and I wouldn't be against it. But there's a reason it hasn't happened at the minute. That's because not everyone can collectively agree that it's best for them in their country, and that's where rugby's had a big issue, where everyone's very protective over their own little area of the game. Battles with Six Nations and various different countries and Tri-Nations and World Cups and everything, and actually finding the right recipe for everyone to be happy and agree is really hard to make such a substantial change. But it needs making in terms of the longevity of the game, and there needs to be give and take from the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere to have everything aligned, to keep the game on its feet effectively.
I'm guessing France is the real sticking point there, because it's also rather warm in the south of France to play July, August.
Well, yeah. I mean, I never forget, I played one of my first games for Brive. We played Toulon away, and the season started in August. It was something like the 17th of August was the first game. We ended up losing 6-3. It was impossible to play rugby in. So it is,
especially they play in August anyway.
But it is a hard balance to find.
I'd like to see it, but we'll see.
Some days, we go to matches now, and I'm free. I get in the car, I'm like, how did I ever play that game in that weather? Because I'm older and I feel the cold now. I didn't feel it when I played, but I see it now from a fan's perspective. I'm like, it's miserable. It's miserable sometimes.
Yeah. In the sideways rain.
You're saying you're a Bath fan, right?
Yeah.
That stand, I tip my hat to people that stand and sit in that stand.
Before I dropped out, I went to uni in Bath, and we'd go down, semi-regularly. And if you caught the wrong, like a Friday night, it would be...
But that, again...
When you're 19, you don't care. But
No, very true.
But not everyone is 19. That's the whole point, right? Not everyone you want to go to a game is a 19-year-old student who's like, whatever. They are going to have 4-year-olds that want to go, and older people and stuff like that. Changing tack a little bit, is Dupont the greatest player ever?
No, okay. Not yet.
Will he be?
Possibly. I mean, again, it goes back to what do you look at as the greatest player ever? Do you look at it in terms of World Cup winners' medals? Do you look at it in terms of achievements? Rugby is such a diverse game of different positions, different.
Yeah, it's hard to.
Body shapes. Someone's idea of their best player in the world is the best prop in the world, whereas someone
only props.
Yeah, but it's
only props would say it's a prop.
And that's the thing. It's the age-old argument of you've got 15 different positions effectively.
Yeah.
And 15, maybe not 15, but 15 completely different types of players. Dupont at the minute is the best player in the world, by far.
Yeah.
And what he does, both sides of the ball, how strong he is, how he influences games individually, collectively, playing in a team like Toulouse, but also internationally. The way he's flipped to sevens now.
Yeah, if he wins a gold medal, that might help.
He's a freak. I think to say the greatest player, he's the greatest player in our current world rugby generation.
Who would be your greatest player ever then?
The bloke that changed the game, Jonah Lomu. And, we've lost Jonah now, sadly, obviously, but he was the guy that probably, and I say it, single-handedly turned the game professional.
Yeah.
For his impact in 95 World Cup, and his stature as a person, and he made rugby a global game, I think. And the game turned professional, I think, off the back of it. And so I'm very grateful for Jonah. I had the privilege of playing against him. Didn't want to go too near him and try and tackle him.
You played against him?
Yeah. But wow. I'd say for an impact perspective, now Jonah didn't win a World Cup.
Yeah.
So, are you saying that he's the greatest player ever, but does someone say the greatest player ever has to have achieved the most of winning the World Cup? So,
But he's so iconic. I mean, I can visualize those images of him running over a try line with 16 Frenchmen on his back, and like it's just ludicrous.
Yeah.
And going back to what we talked about earlier, I mean, he changed the game with physicality.
Yeah.
Because of the size and the speed and the power was just insane.
Yeah, I mean, he looked. It's quite ironic how the game's changed now, but respectfully, when he played, he looked like a freak on the rugby field.
Yeah, yeah.
If you put him in the game now, he wouldn't look.
Yeah.
Much bigger than he wouldn't even be the biggest player on the field.
Yeah.
There'd be 10 Jonas on the pitch, which is frightening, really, with the evolution of the game. But at the time, he was, an absolute phenomenon for the game, and fast forwarded the game into professionalism because of his superstardom. And I'm very grateful that happened, because obviously I had a career off the back of it, and not that I wouldn't have tried to pursue rugby as far as I could in terms of playing the game, but I think for an individual impact on the game of the life of rugby, I'd say he's probably had the biggest impact. You can then argue, different. In my position, there's the whole age-old debate between who's the best 10 ever, Johnny Wilkinson or Dan Carter, and all that stuff. An hard-nosed English fan would say Johnny Wilkinson was the greatest. Around the world, you say Dan Carter. Dan
Carter was better, though, wasn't he?
Pains me to say it because I'm English, and
I mean, Johnny was obviously incredible.
For an all-round player, Dan Carter, skill level, and but then you could argue that Johnny was so belligerent in everything he did, and focused, and attention to detail, and dropping the goal to win the World Cup.
Yeah,
you could argue
he might have the greatest moment.
Yes, but in reality, I'd say Dan Carter was just ahead of Johnny, but. Yeah, for a lot of people, they wouldn't have been the best two players in the world ever, but they were just the best couple of players in that generation, potentially. So, the whole ever debate, because the game has evolved so much over time. You go back to Jonathan Edwards and some of the players from yesteryear. You can't really compare different eras, can you? You go back to Gareth Edwards, players like that of different generations. It's the game's evolved that much that it's very hard to compare, in my opinion, the greatest players ever across a game that's been played for, over 150 years. That a player from the 60s, 70s, 80s.
People do that in football, right? Between like Messi and Maradona and things like that. But it's interesting that football has recreated the global superstars. You've had Pele, and then you had Maradona. And it seems like rugby had Jonah Lomu, and you'd have expected more to have come along since. We haven't necessarily had that, which is interesting. Maybe it was because he was so far ahead of the game at the time, and you almost couldn't do that. I mean, you could. DuPont's probably, he feels ahead of the game, doesn't he? And some of the
he does at the minute.
He does that no one else can do. But maybe because it's much more professional, there's just not that space to have that much of advantage over other people now. Yeah, and
I do you know what? I think rugby, we haven't done ourselves any favours in being a sport that's semi-reserved around...
In the media?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Around making people global superstars.
Or
creating that demand for, I want to be a DuPont, or I want to be, a Dan Carter or Johnny Wilkinson. We're quite reserved in how the game's marketed and all that stuff, which is a good and a bad thing.
Okay. I just see it as a bad thing.
Yeah, from your background, of course. But it's, it's the people talk about the values of the game and all that stuff, and maybe that's the big thing that we need to learn and evolve. And I think they've started to realise that. But is it too late? Or
you could increase the exposure of rugby massively by having a bunch of players go full Conor McGregor, I'm sure of it. Full, we're going to absolutely smash them. They're going to wish they never played rugby. We're going to imagine like an England captain coming out. We're recording this just before England play New Zealand again. Coming out, we're going to absolutely smash them. They think they can't be beaten on their home turf. And that would blow up on social media. Yeah. That would drive more people to watch the game on telly, for sure.
Well, there's a reason a lot of people like Rassie Erasmus or don't like Rassie Erasmus.
But he's
brilliant.
People know who he is.
Yeah. And I know he's won back-to-back World Cups, but part of his strategy has been to grow the exposure that way as well for his country. And there's other ways of doing it. Eddie Jones has done it in his way, which has got lots of eyeballs on him, but from not a great perspective sometimes. But you're right. There needs to be more exposure to it that way and grow narratives from it.
I'd like to see it. I wanted to talk to you as well about the Rugby Pod. How did that first come about?
Yeah, I mean, podcasting now, and here we are sat on a podcast, and it's a thing that anyone, and COVID kind of helped this, anyone realised that they could do it. And the hard thing is doing it regularly and growing it and being successful at it, right? But now it's not hard to pick up a microphone and a bit of recording equipment and off you go, which isn't disrespecting podcasts at all, because I do podcasting. But we looked at it, and there's a guy that's one of the main guys at the Rugby Pod phoned me 8 years ago. He said, I want to try this thing called a podcast. And I'm like, okay, what's that? I didn't have a clue.
8 years ago, 2016?
Yeah. And he said, I'm looking at the media now and the way rugby is and what's out there for people to consume. And at the time, there wasn't masses of rugby on TV. There was games on TV, of course, but there was, in the UK, there'd have been Sky Sports. The odd game. There'd be games on, obviously. There was one radio show.
It'd be pre-BT Sport, wouldn't it? Taking over the Premiership.
No, it was Sky and BT.
Yeah.
But it used to be, I'm trying to think what it used to be called. Before it was BT, ESPN it was.
Oh, yeah.
So it was, there was Sky, ESPN, BT Sport, those kind of people. There was written press.
Yes.
And there was maybe one radio show, maybe on TalkSport. And so there wasn't a lot of other media apart from the traditional kind of at a game. There used to be on Sky Sports, there used to be the Rugby Club on a Thursday that a lot of people would tune in and watch, but they stopped doing that.
Yeah.
So there wasn't this kind of magazine-y show. There wasn't something different to just watching a game and the TV or the media around that game, and then obviously written stuff in the week and online articles or whatever. So there wasn't, apart from, and it was all quite stuffy around the way you suit, and I'd done a lot of that with Sky and with ESPN and BT and whatever, and BT obviously tried to change it as well, but there wasn't something that was different. So he said, look, I want to try this podcast. He said, it might go nowhere, it might be good, it might be a bit of fun, we want some characters,
Yeah, so were you already doing TV gigs? Like, why did he call you?
So I'd just retired.
Yeah.
2016, it was. So I just retired for the second time.
From Newcastle.
Yeah. And, I'd had an opinion. I'm not everyone's cup of tea, I know that, but I've always tried to be authentic and honest with what I think, and if I think something, I'll say it. And he said, look, I'd love to start a podcast, and who do you think you'd be good bouncing off? He said, we need people with character, opinions, because we're going to try and do something differently. And we went through a list of a few people, and I kind of said, I'm mates with Jim. We played together. He's a bit of a clown in a good way. We've got a good relationship, bit of fun. If you need someone to moan about something, he's great. And so we eventually said, let's see if Jim wants to do it.
Yeah.
So we got chatting, and off we went, and thought, let's try this podcast. And we started out with no listeners, right?
Yeah.
And you start talking, well, how are we going to do it? So let's sort of plan out how we're going to run a podcast or whatever. And it was more a case of, well, TV do it this way, and there's written articles and stuff. So let's just try and be authentic. Let's just try and say what we think. And there's, I've done TV stuff where it's like, don't talk about this.
Right.
Try and focus on saying this sort of thing. And not a controlling element, but you sometimes previously you couldn't feel like you could just be yourself. You had to live within parameters of what you can and can't say, and don't be too negative, or don't blow things up too much, like that kind of regulation, run of the mill, sit on the fence kind of media style.
The exact opposite of what you want to do if you're trying to get attention on something.
Yeah. And we didn't start the pod and say, we need a load of attention. It was like, we felt there's kind of a gap where it was. We wanted it to sound like you sat in the pub with your mates chatting about the game that we love. And that's how it first started out. Talking about the game, talking about what's going on, talking about stories, characters, players, and the pod's evolved quite a lot over time over the 8 years we've done it. But it was like this, and we used to sit there. We'd meet in a pub, have 3 or 4 pints. I'd retired.
That's where you used to record.
Yeah, no, we didn't record in the pub, so we'd meet in a pub and then go into a studio.
Oh, like a pre-chat sort of thing.
But we'd sit, had a couple of pints before, what we're going to chat about today. Oh, I've got this story, I've got that story, this has happened. And it wasn't, it was kind of fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing. And then we'd go into the studio and we'd have 3 or 4 more drinks while we're doing it. And that, it started out great and enjoyable, but we didn't think anyone would listen and didn't know how much it would grow. But it was more about telling stories and being authentic about what's happened in our careers, what's happened in the game and all that stuff. And it's evolved now and grown. And I pinch myself all the time around how many people listen to it and the feedback we get and how it's grown to be what it is, because the reality of it is Jim and I were 2 pretty average rugby players. And yes, we had success and I had an 18-year professional career and all that stuff, and Jim played for a long time, 60-odd caps for Scotland, whatever. The ironic thing now is no one probably remembers what we were like as rugby players.
But you get
people talk about the podcast and stuff, and oh, you do the podcast. I used to play, but no one cares, right? Because it was that long ago, which is great. But I suppose how it started out was being characters and seeing a gap in the market around doing something different that wasn't being done. And now there's thousands of podcasts and there's loads in rugby as well. There's loads in different areas, different genres, different sports. And it's easy to pick up a mic and start a podcast. You don't need masses of equipment, do you? But you can go to this level. This is great. But, ironically, you probably need a laptop and a microphone.
Yeah.
In reality, which are fairly easy things for most people to get hold of these days. But we started 8 years ago, and I dread to think some of the things we used to say on podcasts before, and we grew this sort of cult following around being authentic and being ourselves, and saying what we genuinely think, and we love the game, and the game's got its faults, but we love what the game's given us, and
the product's so good for me to watch. I imagine you feel the same way, and then you played as well. So
and listen, it's something that's been inherently part of our lives for a long time. And then starting the podcast and seeing where it's gone and growing. We're 8 years in now, and it is pinch. Jim and I generally say, "How are we still doing this?" Because things don't have in life. There's not many things that have huge longevity, is there?
Yeah.
You look at TV series or other podcasts or other things that you don't necessarily get year on year repeats, do you? Or you might do a series of 3 and that's it. Different things. And so for us, and we're lucky in the sense that rugby gives us something to talk about every week in season. And I completely get that. And that is a big part of what we do. We're relevant to the games that are current at the weekend, and obviously discuss everything that's going on in the game week to week, but also try and do it from a completely authentic space of this is just what we think. I don't want everyone to agree with what I say as much as people might think I do.
Well, I mean, you and Jim don't agree with
on
a lot of stuff.
And that's what we want. The way we've always tried it is you're chatting with your mate about sport, and we happen to chat with our mate, your best mate, about rugby and what you love and your family and what's going on in life, and let's have a moan, let's get that out of the way, and then talk a bit of rugby. But it's very lucky to, and we appreciate every listener that downloads or listens to it from the various different platforms. And my being at home, my better half's like, what rubbish have you spoken today? and that's it's not everyone's cup of tea, we know that, but it's a lot of fun. We love doing it. We're committed to it. You have to be podcasting, right? You commit to something every week. We spend a lot of time now, as the podcasts have evolved, we have to be at the forefront of every bit of detail around the game. And, I spend a lot of time at home hiding in my toilet with my phone out, looking at all the rugby stuff to get away from the kids and get some peace and quiet to be able to do your research and all that stuff. And we love doing it.
Promise.
But we love doing it. We've got this relationship where we bounce off each other.
The chemistry between you is great. That's obviously a huge part of the show's success.
It is. We're both we sit there and we're a couple of idiots that chat about rugby, and people. I think if you can be self-deprecating and criticise and take the mickey out yourself, it makes people relate to you a bit more. And the amount of times, like Jim and I, the way we are with each other, we're two really good mates that hammer each other, right?
Yeah.
And we've got different nicknames for each other and whatever. And like, I'll be walking down the street and someone will scream at me what Jim's called me that week, and I'm I don't even know you, mate. I get it. So Jim sort of called me the belly monster, and he's the melted wheelie bin and different things. And you be in public with your kids, and it's like
belly monster.
I remember we were at Heathrow Airport, flying out to Dubai for a holiday, and it was a night flight, so flying at about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and I'm walking down towards the gate with my twins, who at the time would have been 3. And there was a bloke there at the airport who'd obviously had a few beers in the lounge or whatever. So I start shouting, "Goody, you legend, love the pod," and I'm like,
grabbing you,
just with the kids, and I could tell he'd had a load of beers and all that stuff. And then loud noise at an airport, people start looking over. He's like, "Where's Jim? Where the fucking hell's Jim?" I'm like, "No, I'm here with my family going on holiday."
I'm thinking Jim on my family holiday with me.
And I think because you do the pod, people think you live in each other's pockets and all that stuff. Yeah. And we're on the phone most days to each other, to be fair. But he's up in Edinburgh and I'm live in Buckinghamshire and all that stuff. And we are together a fair bit, but also we're separate a lot as well. But it's the myth of life. We're in touch a lot. Yeah. Jim and I, like daily, but you don't live in each other's pockets as well. But we have that chemistry. We get on well. He's a great bloke. A couple of clowns talking about rugby that seems to. We've been authentic, and I think people just enjoy the jovial element of it, I suppose.
I certainly do. And I think it's a lot.
Thanks, mate.
A lot of your listeners will be like me in terms of, grew up playing a lot of sport, maybe don't do it anymore, don't have those mates that are, giving them a bit of crap. And, do you know what I mean? So you're listening to that, and it's like...
You still feel part of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's how the premise of how we started it was being authentic, like you're in the pub with your mates chatting about the game and, having fun with it. And that's how we've always tried to... Yes, we covered serious elements of the game. Of course we do. And there's, a lot of serious stuff that goes on in the game week to week. But we try and do it with a smile on our face and make people smile. Or try and make people smile, whether that's with us or laughing at us. It doesn't matter as long as people smile.
Yeah. Jim nearly left at some point, though, didn't he? Was he going to be replaced by Joe Marler, if I remember that correctly?
No, he was away. Because Jim's works with World Rugby as well. So and like anything, like you see it now in podcasting, it's not as easy as just rocking up with the mic and everything goes smoothly.
A lot behind the scenes.
There's a lot behind the scenes, and it's not a complaint at all because it's part of what we do, and it's a life in a way that you chose. But arranging stuff and being consistent, and we record every Monday. I've got a job in the city that I'm lucky enough at the minute that I have the flexibility to go and do the podcast on a Monday afternoon. Jim's work with World Rugby is he can be travelling to, and he's done documentaries all over the world with stuff, and sometimes it doesn't align, but it'd be fair to say at least 95% of the time it's me and Jim together on the podcast. I think I've only missed 5 or 6 in over 8 years, which is, it's a commitment, but it's a commitment we love. So I think Joe came in a couple of times, and there was a bit of beef between Jim and Joe, actually.
Right, okay.
From their playing days between Saracens and Quins, and it was like Jim was away, so we got Joe in, and then there was a muscle flex, and it was like, no, this is me. And then we tried to do one together, and the synergy perhaps isn't right, and whatever. People, the synergy and the relationship and the connection that Jim and I have is it's not forced. It's natural. And in this industry, things can be forced. To look good or to, that's what people perhaps want together. Ours is all natural. He's an idiot. I'm an idiot. We're comfortable with each other and we get on well.
Okay. So it was always going to be a temporary thing. It wasn't like it.
Oh no. It was like a little bit of one-off stuff. Let's see how it went. It didn't work. Great. Let's move on. And Joe's gone. Joe is Joe, and he's gone to do his own thing. He's a bit weird. He's
a character though.
Yeah. Me and him have had a few disagreements over time, and it is what it is. Different people can agree on or disagree on different things, and just move on with it, right?
So there's a plan to do the rugby pod for as long as you can?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we're obviously, you can only live in the moment in the season you're in, or the kind of deal that's there now. We'd started out doing it not to make money, doing something we love, and I don't want to bring it back to making money or anything like that, but it was a passion that we started. Let's do something different. Let's create something, and it's still that same passion now. The vibe of doing it, and we do 40 odd episodes a year every week without fail. Throughout the rugby season, we have maybe a week off over Christmas around that sort of stuff. But it's something we both love doing, and get a massive buzz out of doing. Did we think we'd be going 8 years later? No. And every year we do it, we pinch ourselves that we're going to do it for another year. We've seen a global pandemic where the model of what we've done has changed significantly. So obviously over the 8 years, we started off with no listeners. You grow it and you get a couple of sponsors in that take a risk on you, which we're very grateful for. And Guinness were amazing with us early on in our kind of podcasting life, taking a bit of a risk on us with backing us. We did a lot of live shows, and they were our major sponsor for a few years, which we were very grateful for. Then the global pandemic came in, and that sort of changed things. So we had a number of sponsors, because you're trying to monetize things that you do, as everyone does in life. Had a number of sponsors that all of a sudden just got cut for the right reasons of the pandemic, and
they were freaking out and trying to conserve budget.
And ultimately, with the pandemic, and we were chatting to Spotify at the time, we went from being probably super reliant on Guinness, and we're very grateful for that, to then Spotify came in and wanting to license us because of what we'd created up to that point. So they'd obviously seen something in what we'd built, and how we were, and the listenership and the product effectively, and came in, and we were very lucky in the sense of those conversations were happening around the time where Spotify were trying to grow their podcasting presence, and the pandemic hit, so that meant the deal came, and we were always on a year-to-year deal with Guinness. Right. So that at the end of that season, that cut, and it was like, what do we do?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, to run any business, you need revenue coming through the door, right?
Yeah.
And then, timing-wise, it happened really well with Spotify, and we've been on a journey with them over the last 4 years, which they've been amazing.
Awesome.
With us, and I think the relationships work really well. It has from our side anyway. So, we love Spotify, and that has then developed into a long-term relationship that we're with them, and we love doing what we do. So we've worked very hard at it. We've been lucky. We're appreciative of everything that's happened, but it hasn't just happened overnight, and it hasn't just happened because we picked up a microphone a few weeks back and thought. And that's what you look at people in the podcasting world, and I think everyone thinks anyone can do a podcast. You're just going to get loads of sponsors, loads of listeners, and everyone knows how hard it is once you're in it. Right?
Yeah.
So we're very grateful that people tune in every week, and we know we have to stay relevant, and we know we have to evolve and all that stuff to continue that listenership, and it's something we're always very conscious of, but also very conscious of staying true to who we are and what we are and why people listen, and that's the relationship. That's us being authentic and, you know, giving our opinions that don't kind of have any sort of real narrative or reason behind, except for they're just our opinions, and that's what we see and think. And going back to everyone can have an opinion about it, and it's like you sat with your mates in a pub having a beer and chatting about what's going on in the game, and that's the avenue we've taken. And hopefully, will I be doing it forever? I don't know about forever, but we
Forever's a long time.
We didn't think we'd probably get to it. If you'd have said to us 8 years ago, you'll be doing this in 8 years' time, and it would be where it is, I would have been like, you're crazy. Yeah. So who knows what the future holds in terms of another 4, 6, 8 years, but you know, it's love and live what you do in the minute and in the season you're in. And, you know, we've just come to the end of one season, but we'll be back in September again. Bit of a break over the summer, which is always good to recharge and do a few different bits. But, you know, we love doing what we do, and hopefully it'll continue for as long as people want to listen to us talk absolute rubbish about the game that we love.
So Guinness definitely stopped working with you because of the pandemic, not because you put in blackcurrant in your Guinness.
I think they're quite happy with it. No, we still do work with Guinness as well.
But doing like live shows and things like that.
But again, people change within businesses. There was I've got to get his name right. Who was a big influence on us? Got it. I'm always conscious of saying the wrong name, just in case. You know, there was a guy, James Metcalf, who was at Guinness, Diageo, who we owe a huge amount of gratitude to, who was the initial guy that took the kind of risk, I suppose, or took the plunge with us to sponsor us and back us and everything. And Metz is a great guy, but he moves on to a new business, and things change, and the pandemic was there, and we've still got a great relationship with Guinness. We've got a great relationship with Spotify, and it's only Irish people that aren't happy that I put blackcurrant in my Guinness. But I do, any press is good press, right? And
you mentioned the brand name. Talk about the product.
I'll be honest. Again, it's me being honest. I'm not going to hide behind the fact I like a bit of blackcurrant in my Guinness. I've got a sweet tooth, and it just takes the edge off a little bit. And whether there's a lot of Irish people go, that's absolute disgraceful behaviour affecting our Guinness, but there's a few that I've now converted.
Okay.
And I won't mention their names. A few Irish rugby players go, actually, it's not bad, but don't let anyone know. I'm just honest. Like, I'll say it as I see it, and I like a Guinness and black, and that's about it.
You mentioned when you started there was basically no rugby podcasts, and now there's a lot of them. Is that a concern at all, the change in the market? Is it harder to get listeners now than it was previously?
I thought it's probably a yes and no answer. Is it a concern? Yes. And no. Yes, in the sense of people come new to market, you might lose listenership, or I'm not a massive podcast listener.
Right, okay.
Which sounds bizarre when you do a podcast every week. I deliberately don't want to listen to other rugby podcasts.
I get that.
Because I don't want to be influenced by how other people do stuff, which might be a negative, but it might be a positive. People might go, well, you should look at the competition and you should see what they're doing. And I'm not a huge listener of other podcasts either, and I don't mean that. It's just something I've never got into. When I'm in the car, people generally listen to podcasts in the car, walking the dog, in the gym, on commutes, on trains, wherever. And I'm a bit of heart 80s in the car, or I'm a watcher of something on a commute or whatever. And so, with all the other rugby podcasts out there, it's a good thing, because obviously there is a demand for it. So that means that what we're doing is, hopefully, other people are seeing that it's a good thing to do. And I wouldn't say no one's ever sort of copied what we do, but the fact that other people have come in to do rugby podcasts means that it's a good thing, because there's a demand for it, right?
Yeah.
Yes, there's a worry that your listenership goes to someone else, but I speak to a lot of people around the game, and fans and people we meet, and they go, I listen to yours. Some people go, oh, you're the only one to listen to. Other people are like, I listen to all of them.
Yeah.
And so, and when someone says to me they listen to all the rugby podcasts, I'm like, well, there must be about 10 out there. So that's, if they average out an hour a week or whatever, Well, that's 10 hours a week, which is a lot to commit to. Right?
I'd probably be scared to know how many hours of podcast I will consume in a week.
It's like when you get your iPhone notification screen time, like, no way. No way.
Surely. But yeah, but I listen to, not all of them, but I listen to 4 or 5, I listen to Rugby Pod every week, and Egg Chasers and The Good, The Bad and the Rugby. There's going to be a handful there, right, that I'll listen to.
But some people will just pick one.
Exactly.
And some people listen to them all. So is it a good or a bad thing? It's probably a good thing that there's a lot of options out there.
It's probably a good thing up to a certain point, because there's probably some people that would like to listen to, say, your podcast that just don't listen to any podcast. If they can just get introduced to one and they go, I really like that, but it's only an hour a week. I wonder if there are any others that I'd like to listen to an hour a week, and then it can grow that way. So
yeah. I mean, it's obviously the podcasting world has exploded, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And it's the balance of growing it to a certain extent. The competition there, as you said, with some people might listen to others. Yeah, you might have some that don't listen every week. Just relative to something that you put out on social media, a guest or a topic. And
I imagine like Six Nations for you.
Yeah,
I imagine views, listens shoot up.
Yeah, World Cup and Six Nations are our kind of. Obviously, the World Cup was in
of course
September, October last year, but realistically, every season, autumn internationals and Six Nations are the big periods where we see spikes, because there's more eyes on rugby. And there's different ways of getting new listeners in terms of hooks. I'm someone that will scroll on social media and you see all the clips of a podcast, whatever genre you listen to. And I see one clip and follow that, like that. And that might then lead you to clicking on the podcast and start listening to it regularly. And what it's like with your podcast that you're doing here. You won't get people that listen to everyone.
No.
But you might get people that, you had Dodge Woodall who I've known for years. Yeah. And you see that clip on his socials or on yours and you listen to that.
Yeah.
And then that might get them hooked in for the next one and the next one. So I don't think there's a hard and fast way of keeping listeners or, and it's seasonal.
Yeah.
Obviously with ours, it's every week during the rugby season. But the fact that we do one every week during the rugby season means that people might miss them. They go, there's another one next week as well. And ours become, and it's the whole balance between the relevancy of that very week, and you want people, would you go back and listen to one of our podcasts from 6 weeks ago, because it's talking about games from 6 weeks ago.
It's a different structure. You're going to listen that week, or basically you're not.
But then some people, equally, I find people that go, listen to the other one from 4 weeks ago. I'm like, and I sit there, I'm like, I find that amazing, because there's been 4 weeks of games since then. So, it's like when you do podcasts, you can't necessarily remember what you said 3 or 4 weeks ago. Unless you go back and sense check it yourself. So, it's a week-to-week thing that we love. I suppose the question was, is it a good or a bad thing that there's loads of podcasts?
Mixture.
Yes or no answer. Sitting on the fence. I don't normally sit on the fence.
Awesome. Well, I'm a big fan of the Rugby Pod, and I will certainly continue listening. And Andy, I want to say thank you very much for taking time to come and speak to me. Really enjoyed this conversation and really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been fun.
I love having chats like these, but I'd like to know what you think as well. So let me know in the comments below. If you want to watch another one of my podcast episodes, you can do so right here.